this agreement. I'm going to do just a little, marketing just before we move ahead. So this is the inaugural issue of the Review of Keynesian Economics. It's just out. It has naked pictures of Frank. No. It's foldable, so yeah. It's too expensive for anybody to buy, but
the only naked kings in here.
Exactly. So, but you can ask your libraries to get a subscription, so that would be good. I'm just gonna say few things that are slightly different. Complement some of the things that he said. In general terms, I would tend to agree with everything Eduardo said before. And I'll try to tie these a little bit to questions of history of thought, I suppose, in Latin America, which I think would make sense for the conference. So, first of all, I should say that he's absolutely right that the Washington Consensus, the original Washington Consensus, the Decalogue of Mr. Williamson had two differences with what actually the Washington institutions wanted. So one has to understand that there is what Williamson thought that the Washington Consensus was, and what the actual institutions, the Treasury, the IMF, the World Bank, actually wanted to do. And Williamson was not quite good at saying that. He had two big differences with the actual consensus. One was the exchange rate. The other one is, actually I wrote a little paper on that. The other one is capital controls. So he was not for liberalizing, the capital account. It's a paper 2002-3 in the International Journal of Political Economy. It's called Globalization, a Dangerous Obsession. And the other one is exactly the exchange rate. And so he was more reasonable, at least on those two things, when compared to. He was very fiscally conservative, and I think that's if you look at the first three things of the Washington Consensus, they're all about fiscal policy. And so what I want to talk a little bit more is exactly about fiscal policy. And then I'll say a few things about ISI, and particularly the relationship of China and the US on those issues, which might be relevant for us. So I tend to agree that in part Latin America was able to grow significantly over the last 10 years or so. Argentina in particular, let's say Brazil, because we have pursued expansionary policies, and that the exchange rate was less relevant because of its impact, particularly say Argentina, the big devaluation in 2002, Brazil even less in 1999 because it's not as big, the depreciation there in real terms. The Argentinian overvaluation during the precedent decade was considerably larger. Not so much because it allowed huge increase in exports per se, as people tend to think, but because it allowed a significant amount of protection domestically and a significant expansion of domestic markets. That was essential. And fiscal policy, and I think Fabian is around here, he sort of told me that he has redone his calculations for the impact of fiscal policy. They seem to be considerably larger than what he suggested before, which fits all my prejudices. So I love when empirical analysis goes, agrees with me. I tend to agree with me a lot. Incredible sort of phenomenon. And so, and that again goes to a phrase that I love from Fabian, that, because here in Argentina, the literal translation, what was happening, and the conventional sort of explanation is that we grew because of, the wind, and the sales, and that wind was, the growth in the price of commodities, and that allowed, significant growth and whatnot. And he always says, true, we did have an impact because of the higher prices of commodities on a softening, if you want, of the external constraint. But if you're going to grow, because of the winds, you have to open up the sails. And so that clearly is the case. That differentiates, I think, the actual average rate of growth of Argentina over the whole period is slightly less than 7%, whereas the Brazilian is probably around, with this year growing less, probably something like, slightly less than 4, I was going to say. So that's more or less, the difference of doing expansionary fiscal policy and not doing expansionary fiscal policy. There is an additional, sort of data that I think it's important. The last report of the MAQ has one chapter that is worth reading. Oops. Chapter 3, which discusses exactly business cycles in Latin America. And it has to do with something I discussed yesterday about Prebic. The idea that the notion in that chapter is that business cycles, the fluctuations, particularly the booms, have permanent effects on the trend. And that goes to sort of an idea that our friend here has been debating for a long time, the idea of the super multiplier, and that potential output is endogenous and demand-driven. And what they look is at the data from the 19th onwards in Latin America in comparison to other countries, other regions, I should say. And what they found out, for example, is that over the cycles over the last 20 years, or the fluctuations, I should say, not very clearly cycles in the periphery particularly, the growth rate, the average, recessions in Latin America, when compared to East Asia, for example, are not larger. In fact, they're slightly smaller. Okay, so the Asian crisis, on average, okay, it's very different. Say for Argentina, had a much larger crisis than most countries, probably than everybody else. But Brazil has way less, and so on the average, and Mexico too, and so on and so forth. So when you average out, Latin America, has the falls are of around 8% of GDP. In Asia, we're of 9% of GDP. If memory doesn't, don't quote me precisely on this, but it's slightly higher in Asia. And the duration of the recessions is also more or less the same, around 4 trimesters. In both in East Asia and in Latin America. So we don't have more profound or more prolonged crisis. The big difference is in the booms. So in the booms, Asia has way longer booms, which now I don't remember the number of trimesters, but it's significantly larger. I think it's around 40 something, whereas Latin America on average is less than half of that. It's 19, 18. And also they grow way more. So over that period they grow whatever 70%, not per year, obviously the whole period. And we grow something more like 30% or something like that. So around half. Again, with significant variations, as I just told you. Brazil has grown less than Argentina over the last decade. We compensate. Okay, so the 90s Argentina underperforms, and so on average Argentina and Brazil are not that different. We're just better at soccer. Oops. Yeah. So there's an important message in that story, and the message is that we tend to soften try to smooth out the booms. So we don't allow the booms to take hold, and the notion is, again, it's Prebic in the 30s and the 40s is criticizing exactly that idea. He says that there is a conventional idea in which the cycles somehow revert to trend, and so that if you allow the boom to go too far, you cannot go too far because the trend is exogenous, and so the idea was that you were going to fall, and the fall would be bigger the bigger your boom. He says that's wrong. We should really stimulate the boom and try to be all the time consistently close to the maximum capacity of demand, because that will push the actual limit of the economy out. As I said yesterday, there are several other problems with Prebic's theory, which I don't want to discuss, but that political insight, as I suppose I said after the discussions, Prebic was much better as a person. He understood the institutional, historical, political framework. As I said, even in his dynamic lectures, he's talking about center and periphery, and the fact that the U.S. is hegemonic, not England anymore, and whatnot. So it's that policy insight that it's important, and I think it's quite relevant for us right now. So if you look at why Latin America, is not going to grow that much in this year, and also, I should say, in the case of Brazil, also last year. It has to do not with international crisis. As I said, my presentation in Brazil was called "Crisis? What crisis?" So we're not having a crisis like Europe is having a crisis. We don't have a political party in like in the U.S. that doesn't allow them to expand. Although the U.S. also doesn't have a crisis per se. They could, if they want to get out of their slow recovery. They certainly could. In Latin America, we could we could certainly be growing faster than we are. Right now, and part of the story is fiscal adjustment. So not just in Brazil, Suma here presented a few months back the data on Brazil of how they cut public investment. The case of Argentina is also very similar. We have significant deceleration on the rate of expansion of public investment and fall in certain categories like transfers to provinces and so on and so forth. That does not mean, obviously, that it's all hunky-dory. If we wanted just to expand, we would be fine. So the problems, really the empty chair here, he's not here, Franco, so, of the debate is, how do you get out of the conundrum that, yes, because of different reasons, say Brazil, because they allow nominal appreciation of the currency, yes, because we have higher inflation and that led to real appreciation, that we have had real appreciation of the currency, that the current account deficit surpluses vanished in Brazil. They're smaller, in Argentina, leaning towards, probably zero, these last 2 years. How do you get out of, this particular situation? So how are you going to expand fiscally and continue to grow if your, external accounts are, sort of. And in that situation, Argentina has a more complicated story than Brazil, because Brazil actually has been able, not necessarily, it's not necessarily good, for all sorts of, macroeconomic policies, but certainly because of the high, still relatively high rates of interest, has, been able to attract flows of capital. And the balance of capital, the financial and capital account has compensated current account deficits, and Brazil still accumulates reserves and whatnot. In the case of Argentina, there's less space for attracting flows of capital probably, and most likely we have limitations also on the size of reserves ahead. The other thing that I want to say is, and I'm a big fan of the idea, that's why I throw my pen, the thing of, the story of ISI. So what this says is that we have to, it cannot be just exchange rate, for the reason he said. Okay, so the elasticities are just not there. Okay, so if you do the math, and Roberto knows that, I should say. When you press him, he actually knows that the elasticities are not there. So if you depreciate, you don't get much in terms of increase of exports. For example, in terms of Brazilian, our biggest market for industrial exports, it has no effect. If price elasticities are not only insignificant from an economic point of view, you cannot get those numbers to the significant statistic. It's irrelevant. The only thing that it's relevant is the income elasticities. So the only thing that would help in that respect is if Brazil was growing at 5%, and that's more or less general. So that's, so what this says is that you have to go back to the old policies. You have to, do import substitution, you have to use exchange controls, and that, has not been done. One of the things that I think it's important to understand is also that to do those things, you have to create state capacity, building institutions, which is not easy. We have destroyed an incredible amount of institutions in Argentina. When in the 30s, Prebisch was doing the central bank exchange controls, they had a whole office in the central bank of people, actually, determining who they were going to, give dollars and who they wouldn't sell dollars. So that's an important thing that you have to have in place. You have to have also credit mechanisms, to allocate credit and so on and so forth. So those things, institutional building, I think it's the big challenge. And again, this says something about the,